Welcome to another episode of Finding the Good. I believe this is episode 11.
It is.
I am not your normal host, but I am privileged to be the husband of Brianna. My name is Jonathan Zenaneri, and today we get to share a really special story, your very own Brianna's story. So,
Thanks, babe, for doing this. He doesn't always like to be on camera, so I'm really honored that you are interviewing me today. But yeah, we are actually coming up on the 1 year anniversary of Finding the Good, and I was like, I guess I should share my story, right? I think some of you guys already know it, but then again, a lot of you guys don't. And my story is actually one of the reasons why I wanted to start Finding the Good, and so I feel like you should know about that. Another thing is, once you hear my story, God spoke to me years ago about this, sharing my family's testimony. I was like watching some Dateline or 2020 interview where it was talking about, drugs here in America and just the epidemic. There you go. Thanks, babe. The epidemic, and it followed like 3 families around, and every single story was really sad. There was no hope. One of them ended up ODing, the other one was incarcerated, and so it was just really sad. And in that moment, I felt like God was like, you need to share the hope and the goodness that has come out of your family's situation. And so here we are.
So why don't we begin? Why don't you tell us about your upbringing?
Yeah, so I grew up in a home where it wasn't the most stable home. I had a dad who was addicted to drugs, and I pretty much knew this my entire life living there. Some of my earliest memories, is me being in the back seat of the car, and my mom knocking on drug dealers' houses and asking where her husband is or where our stuff is. If my dad didn't have money, he would actually take our things, and that's how he would trade for drugs, or he would pawn them. My mom used to tell me that she would actually sleep with keys in her socks, and she put all our valuables like in the trunk for the night so my dad wouldn't steal them. And so I grew up just in this repeated cycle, because my dad would go on binges for months and then he would be clean. And so it was really tough. I had a good core group of friends at the time. A lot of them, came from happy families. And, I remember just being at a young age, just like, I don't understand why my family can't be this way, or watching movies or shows, and I was just like, I wish that was me. I kind of lived this double life. I would go to school, and I'm like, if only people knew what was going on last night. It was really tough, because not only was it hard as a kid, but I was also super embarrassed. I don't think anyone wants to admit that they come from this broken, home, and that, their dad is present, but not actually present to be the father that you need them to be. Yeah. And what was really crazy, though, is growing up in this environment. I actually grew up in church as well. And that was super confusing, because, going to church, I saw God do miracle after miracle. I saw him answer other people's prayers, and I was just like, okay, what's going on? So it was very twisted. Again, living this double life where, Monday through Saturday we were different people, and then on Sunday we had to like put on this face.
Yeah, so growing up with friends that have a different example of what life looks like compared to yours, and also being a part of church, what was your view of God during that time?
Yeah, so like I said, it was a little distorted. I knew he was real. I just didn't understand why he couldn't be real in my life. And so when my dad went on those binges, I just really wanted nothing to do with God. And then when my dad would be clean for those few months and be active in church, I was cool with God. But when I graduated high school and I moved away off to college, I was finally like, okay, religion is like not being pushed on me. I don't have to go to church. I'm an adult now. I can make my own decisions. And so I decided just to go buck wild, you know. Even in the environment that I was living in, I still didn't want to disobey my parents. I kind of feared, you know, their authority and stuff. And so I never partied or did any of those things in high school. So when I went off to college, I was like, Christianity is so boring. I don't want anything to do with it. And so I'm going to kind of live my own life. And so, you know, I smoked, I drank. The club was probably like my second home. But what's so crazy is when you grow up, you know, in church, you know better and you know right from wrong. And so I always had like this smidge of conviction that I knew I was not living, you know, the life that God had for me, but I was selfish and didn't want to obey him and kind of just wanted to do my own thing.
Yeah. So fast tracking a little bit, because this story does have a happy ending, which is amazing. So you want to take us to that moment where things started to change in your life?
Yeah. So I believe I was like maybe 21, and my parents had just come to a really bad place in their marriage. I mean, my mom has always been my dad's ride or die, and they were high school sweethearts, and so that was kind of hard for me and my sisters because we used to blame my mom. Like, not only could we like not stand my dad, but then we started resenting my mom because we were like, you know, you're the one that like puts us in this situation. Like, you have the right to choose, you know, to be with him or not. And so she never left him, but it came to a point where she was talking about divorce. And being the oldest, and my parents are also pretty private, felt like I was put in the middle of a lot of things. I always knew way too much. And so when that happened, I had both of my parents kind of talking to me, and, you know, my mom basically told them, like, that's it, I'm done, I want a divorce. And my dad was just kind of like, you know, please give me one more chance. And so I think they were separated at the time. He moved back into the house. And my dad has this like radical, crazy experience with God, which, you know, maybe one day he'll share on here or something. But, you know, God basically tells them, like, my grace for you is just up. Like, you've just been playing games for years and years. And if you don't get your act together, basically the next time you touch a drug, like, that's going to be it for you. And so in that moment, my dad, you know, repents and, you know, says he's gonna quit, and, you know, calls me to tell me, I'm like in San Antonio at the time, and calls to tell me, and I'm just kind of like, okay, sure, like, whatever you say, you know. And in my head, I was just kind of like, give it a few months and he's gonna go back to his old ways. And so yeah, I kind of just continued to do my own thing. I partied, and I think at the time it had gotten really bad to where I was going out maybe 3 or 4 times a week, super hungover, just super lonely, you know, trying to find fulfillment and partying and relationships, and just, you know, having this like gap and just trying to fill it with everything other than God, right? And months go by and my dad is still clean. And then months go by and I start seeing like a change in my mom and my sisters. And now everyone is like serving the Lord and going to church. And I'm back, you know, in San Antonio, and I'm just kind of like, oh gosh, like I'm missing out. Like, you know, they have something that I really want.
And this is the turning point for you.
Yeah, so I was like on this party binge, and I remember just being so drunk and waking up the next day, and I was like still in my club clothes, and it was like, I don't know, like 5 in the afternoon or something like that. And I like go and I look at myself in the mirror, and I'm just like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I know this is not who I am. I know that God has more things for me. And so at the time, the internship I was in, it had come to an end, and so I decided to to just pack up my things and head home. And so, within those 2 weeks, God really got a hold of my life. I can't tell you like what day it was, but just being there with my family, it was just super contagious. And literally it was like from night to day that, my whole perspective just changed on who God was.
Wow. So looking back now, because you've even come such a far way from even that point in your faith. And so looking back now on all the things, like how can you see and where can you see God's goodness in your story?
Yeah, when you're going through really sucky stuff, you don't ever think about God's goodness. And for so long, like I said, I saw God answer so many people's prayers. And, I never understood why he couldn't answer mine. But I look back now and I'm like, man, God never left not only my side, but my family's side. There were times that my dad shouldn't even be alive. He should have OD'd, and he never OD'd. With my dad not being present and my mom having to work and provide, I had loving, grandmas and people around us who always prayed for us, always made sure we were fed and we had clothes on our back. And so I think also just my family, the importance of family during those times. We couldn't stand each other. We didn't care to go on family vacations. Like, family time wasn't a huge deal. And now if you were to look at our family dynamic, you would have no idea that we used to hate each other. We're so tight now. And so God really restored our family, and he redeemed those years that we lost. Because I was like 21, I think, when my dad got saved. And so that's a lot of years of, memories to make as a family. And God really restored and redeemed those things. And then most importantly, my salvation, because, when my dad was doing those things, it was his addiction and kind of one foot in, one foot out that made me not want to have anything to do with God. And then I might get emotional. It's so crazy how God redeems those areas, and he uses those bad things again for his good. And so with my dad getting saved, God turned that area of my life around and used it to bring me back to him.
That's amazing. Yeah. So Brianna's been amazing about starting this series to help people share their testimony to help other people. So what is advice for someone with a loved one struggling with addiction? Like, what would you tell them?
Yeah, so if you have a loved one who's struggling with addiction, there's a few things I would say. The first is to pray, pray, pray. Never stop praying. We had went out with a couple for dinner, and that was a topic of conversation is prayer. We might not ever know why God doesn't answer prayers, immediately or on our own timing, right? And it's not for us to know, but I know you said you had been praying for something for like 14 years. With my dad, it took 20 something years, but God always has a purpose and in timing for what he's doing. And so even if you feel like you sound like a broken record, like, keep going to God with that prayer request. He knows your heart, but he still wants you to come to him. The second thing I would say is to not stop loving that person. I look back now, and there is a lot of times where, we cussed my dad out and called him this and called him that. And something that's never left me is my dad told me, nobody wants to be a drug addict. And so, if that person is already feeling super low, don't kick them, while they're down. And you can love someone from afar, and you can love with boundaries. It doesn't mean, you let someone walk all over you, or, if you're too close to that situation and it's hard for you to love that person, I would say step back and allow God to do the work. It's not on you to change the person. It really has to be, in the heart of the other person to want to change. And so just continue to love them. And then lastly, I would say, seek out a Christian counselor or a church leader, just someone you trust. And I say Christian because they're going to point you back to Jesus and back to the Word of God. But you need strength when you have a loved one who's going through addiction. And so talking to someone really helps, because in return, it's going to help you to love that person better if you are healed yourself. And so, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you.
I'm sure if anybody had more pointed questions about something like that, you could probably message Finding the Good on any social media platform. But thanks so much.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you for checking out another episode of Finding the Good. This is episode 11, and Brianna's been able to share 10 other women's stories, and it's really been amazing to be kind of on the sidelines, cheering her on this whole time. And my takeaway from this one is really a takeaway that I've been thinking about since I've known her for over 2 years now. On our second hangout, actually, she shared this story with me, and I was blown away at her vulnerability, and just blown away that she was so comfortable and strong and sharing, extremely vulnerable parts of her story. And so my takeaway is really that of her testimony, and not just that she shares it, but that she allows it to adapt and change over time. And it's as if the more she forgives and the more that she is able to share it with people, the more it evolves and matures. And it seems like the more it's able to be used by the Lord to reach other people. And so, my takeaway is for myself to allow my testimony to continue to adapt and evolve, and for you guys to allow your testimony to adapt and evolve. Because I feel like, asking the question of Brianna in the end, how do you see God's goodness? Every time she looks back on her story, it can change because more time has passed. And if she allows it, and if you choose it, and if I choose it, more things can be healed, more forgiveness can be given, and more strength can be gained. And so just really impactful for me to look at my life and look at all the areas where God's been present, and to let my testimony allow it to change.